Hello and welcome to today's Mind Your Career webinar program. My name is Adam Sylvain and I work with the Alumni Career Development Team here at the University of Chicago in Hyde Park. We are delighted to welcome you to a rebroadcast of our webinar entitled Social Work Opportunities in the Military. We'll be joined today by Michelle Sierra Quandam, U.S. Air Force Captain and UChicago alum. Michelle has served as an active duty social worker in the United States Air Force for over 4 years, serving at JBSA Lockland in San Antonio, Texas, and at her current overseas tour at Kadena Air Base in Okinawa, Japan. She joined the military as a fully licensed clinician with previous experience with school counseling, therapeutic weight loss, crisis counseling, and hospital consulting. She has a unique ability to talk about some of the differences between military versus civilian social work practice. We're delighted to have you, Michelle, and without further ado, I'll turn things over to you.
All right, thank you, Adam. I appreciate the introduction. Let me just kind of scroll over and make sure we're on the right page. Okay, so today, again, kind of going to do an overview just of military social work opportunities in general, but a lot of it, not intentionally biased though, is going to be from an Air Force perspective, just because that's what I've been working in. As he's kind of stated, I am active duty and been active duty for about 4 years now. I came in initially with a 3-year contract, and then have extended it after accepting an overseas tour. But before we go into all that, I do have just that general disclaimer that we have to go over. So all these views that all the views and opinions that I'm gonna discuss today are my own personal opinions on my own experience within the military service, and don't necessarily reflect the opinions of the United States Air Force, the DoD, or the US government. So nice little disclaimer in the beginning, but we'll continue. So the bulk of the presentation, we're going to go over about kind of 5 different things. What are some of the basic requirements? What does an active duty service commitment mean or look like? And then a thorough kind of analysis of what are the benefits, both clinically, pay-wise, and even for our dependents as well, so our spouses and our children. Opportunities after the service, and then looking at some resources and recruitment options too. So just to start it off, let's overview some basic requirements. So you do have to be a U.S. citizen. There are some realms of, I've served with individuals who are from the Philippines or from Vietnam or from other locations. That I can't speak to as well, but again, if you do have questions later on in the presentation, I am going to provide my email address and I can get people connected to the right resources. But ultimately, some of the basic requirements that you're a U.S. citizen, you're between the age of 18 and 48, and the little asterisk is because these requirements do sometimes change and they vary per military branch. So kind of a little bit later on, you'll see that visit link. That visit link goes into our what's called Air Force instructions, or DoD's, Department of Defense instructions, that really outline in more detail what are the requirements as of the most current what's called AFI again, or DoD. So do click on that link later on, or use that or look that up to really get a great understanding of what is required at that time. Because when I got in versus right now, there have been some changes in those areas. So again, 18 to 48 years of age, being in good physical health, and each military branch has different standards for that. So for the Air Force, kind of the big 4 components of our fitness are a 1.5-mile run, push-ups, sit-ups, and an abdominal circumference. So those are the 4 things we test as the Air Force. The Marines do things a little differently. The Navy and the Army do things a little differently. So physical health is kind of differently described per branch. And then one basic requirement as being a social work, a licensed clinical social worker within the military, is having a social work graduate degree. A 3.25 GPA is what's recommended, is one of the higher requirements of all the different branches. So Army has a little bit, I think, lower of a GPA requirement, but for all branches, sometimes you can get a waiver. So same thing with age, GPA, and different kind of requirements, waivers are possible. And then those are things you talk to your recruiter about and see. One thing again, a lot of these come with caveats. So being licensed with 2 years experience is ultimately what's preferred. And I believe right now, currently for 2019, what the military, what the Air Force in particular is looking for. But we have seen, and when I first got in 2015, I believe it was, you could actually enter in right after graduate school or with less experience as what's called a resident within the military, and do a 1-year tour at a certain base for your residency program, kind of getting spun up and working towards your licensure, and then transferring over to being fully qualified. But all too often right now, we're looking for 2 years of license experience, and in particular, getting that or having that experience being with adult outpatient therapy. I came in with a unique experience, kind of all over the place, from background in child social work slash kind of school counseling to crisis management. So I had a amalgam. I was actually initially waitlisted when I was applying, but was able to still get in through that process. So again, there's caveats to a lot of these things, but the goal is 2 years of adult outpatient experience is what's quote unquote ideal. And then some other basic requirements is some kind of basic leadership skills and or interest or ability to desire to grow in that realm. So when you enter in as a licensed clinical social worker within the military, the goal is you're an officer first. So you're a United States Air Force or other branch officer first, and then after that, you are a licensed clinical social worker. And so really, they do stress a lot about leadership skills and experience, but it isn't a mandate by any means. Okay, and then some other things recommended that I kind of talked about again is that adult outpatient therapy, and one other thing too that I actually didn't know about till I got in was possibly looking at getting board certified. So if you already have board certification, that's awesome. There's bonuses that we'll talk about that come with that board certification. I wasn't aware of that till I joined and was able to get it while being in. But board certification, again, just makes you that much more marketable because it is really competitive to join a military service branch. So some overview on the active duty military commitment. So for the Air Force particularly, I'm not as confident or sure about the Navy and the Army. So those are the other two branches. You actually can't be a active duty social worker for the Marines because the Navy takes care of all of has all of their medical care. But for the Air Force, it's a 3 or 4 year initial contract. So for me, myself personally, I decided to do 3 years, see if it was an appropriate fit for me. But those are two options you have. And then yes, hey, being an active duty member, we are 24/7 deployable. So when I'm on leave, quote unquote, I am able to take that leave, go home, or go to another international country or things like that. But there are things I have to submit for, and certain countries I'm not even allowed to go to. And then there are some countries where I am allowed to go to, but can be quite a long process sometimes to get to those countries. And ultimately that's because we're here, 24/7 to support our nation, either abroad or at home. So that is one thing that's part of the military commitment that you have to be aware of. And then deployment possibilities. So as an active duty social worker, it actually isn't as mandated in a career. It can help again with career progression, but if you don't volunteer, there is a lower likelihood, at least in the Air Force, that you'll get deployed. I'm not as sure as far as the Army and the Navy go. From my understanding, there are more deployments in those branches, but each one's a little bit different. And then too, we do have kind of travel and paid moves every 2 to 4 years. So for me, I was in Texas for about 2 years. And then I was pulled or selected to come overseas, and I've been overseas for 2, but I'm committed to 3 years here in Japan. So it is kind of really interesting experience, but on average, people stay per location from about 2 to anywhere between 2 to 4 years. There's a various amount of options. So the Navy, a big portion of them are in Camp Pendleton down in San Diego. And 2, they service the Marines in areas like Norfolk, Virginia. And there is a little bit more limited options when it comes to some of the naval bases. The Army and the Air Force does have a lot more options when it comes to location opportunities. As far as location opportunities go within the Air Force, we're talking almost all over the country, from California to Georgia to also things like Minnesota. We have Minot up there. Wyoming, Colorado. So we have a big kind of depth and breadth of base options that sometimes it's about, hey, do you want to be near family? Do you want to see a new part of the country, or do you want to see a different part of the world? And internationally, we have bases not only in Japan, but also in Germany, in the United Kingdom, and in various other locations. So there are a wide selection of options out there that you can choose. Usually when people first enter, though, they do look at doing a stateside location just to get people used to what it's like to be a social worker in the military, all the acronyms and all those kinds of things prior to doing overseas, but not always the case, too. So if you're really gung-ho about wanting to go overseas initially, that is a potential chance. That's something you'd have to talk to your recruiter about and things like that. So now we'll kind of segue off into some of the benefits. So again, breaking it down first with some of the clinical benefits. This is actually some of the reasons why I decided to join the military in the first place, was because of the clinical benefits. So, when I was graduated after attending the University of Chicago, I was working in a little area called East Chicago in Northwest Indiana. And the school I was working for at that time did not allow me to kind of prioritize my supervision, did not allow me the opportunity to really work towards my licensure. And so that's where I started shifting careers a little bit more to get those kinds of clinical benefits. And when I was fully qualified and fully licensed, I still wanted more. And a lot of it was, hey, you have to pay, $100, $200 out of pocket to get these additional trainings. Well, the awesome part about serving it within the military is a lot of these CUs, you can either do what's called a temporary duty. So your squadron or your unit can fund your training. So, we're anywhere between, a 6-hour, one-day training to a week-long or 2-week-long different trainings for your clinical specialty. Or if you're really interested in cognitive processing therapy, or you're really interested in getting more cognitive behavioral therapy tools, especially, for insomnia, certain things that will really help our military population. Well, those are things that the military wants to support. In addition to that, there are certain other CU companies who just give us, as a kind of a benefit and support, PESI gives us training absolutely free. So from webinars, both the in-person trainings, if we allow them to know, hey, we're an active duty member serving in the XYZ location, they'll actually give us those trainings without charge too. And then there's also what's called CDP, or the Center for Deployment Psychology too. So again, a wide range of opportunities to really enhance your clinical skills. And that, I think, is really a very unique and not as often discussed reason why people join the military in the first place. So something to think about and consider. And then also, while you're in, you do have this really varied clinical experience. So there are 4 departments within what's called your flight. So ultimately, the mental health is divided into what's called the Behavioral Health Optimization Program. So that's your embedded primary care, really working closely with the social workers. So a lot of that's short-term solution-focused therapy or acceptance and commitment therapy. But that's one level, so it's called, again, Behavioral Health Optimization Program, working really closely with primary care. And then we have 3 other elements too, so 3 other departments ultimately, one of which is just general mental health outpatient. We also have an alcohol and drug abuse prevention and treatment program, and then we also have family advocacy, which is really specific towards domestic violence issues, suspects of child abuse and neglect. So there's this wonderful, varied clinical experience. And the goal is to really be a valuable asset for the military. Is you go into each of these different elements ultimately throughout your career in various positions, either leadership roles, or mental health provider roles, to, again, kind of enhance your skills and then provide the services to our active duty members and families. And there are other things too. So as you progress within the ranks, so, there's these different ranks for one where you enter into the military. Most fully licensed social workers enter in as a first lieutenant or a captain. So that's what's called an O2 or an O3 in rank. And that'll make a little bit more sense when we look at pay a little bit later. But ultimately, when you enter in those different, as you move up in the ranks, you can possibly take on more leadership roles. So not just at these element levels in directing and managing a mental health clinic or directing, managing, the alcohol and drug abuse program, but then ultimately looking at what's called a flight commander position. So managing all of those clinics, or a step above that is managing, it might be a medical treatment facility as a whole. And again, that's as you move up in the ranks. So some interesting things to think about. There are really some amazing and impeccable career opportunities if you do stay in. And then there's also career broadening and these additional kind of experiences that you can have. A lot of people do this, what's called leadership track, but there are other options too if you're interested in research or if you're interested in other kind of realms or departments within the military. And then some of the other clinical benefits, one thing that when I was working at a school or when I was working in the weight loss field, I didn't get as much as when I was working in hospital settings, which is that consultation and treatment team. So, we're very lucky here. We actually have 3 prescribers over here in Japan, 2 of which are psychiatrists and 1 nurse practitioner. We have, 2 or 3 active duty clinical psychologists. And so I can really, as a social worker within this realm of mental health, I can really lean on my other teammates too. If I'm having a really complicated case, there's always a door open, and I'm never left in the dark having to solve or deal with high risk or high acuity situations on my own. So it's a wonderful treatment team approach as well. And then the last clinical benefit that I really love and that we're really shifting towards within the military is what's called the Defense Health Agency and trusted care. So there's all these kind of wonderful cultural changes and shifts that we're looking at as we try and chase zero harm within our hospital treatment approach and really become more patient-centered and focused in on. And then within that, there's just so much new training and skills that they're giving us to really focus in on how can we get the best care possible, how can we give excellent clinical care to our patients. So some really intensive clinical benefits. And then obviously too, and I guess it looks like it came out a little funny as far as military pay rates go, but there are benefits too when it comes to pay. So the social work pay before I was licensed, obviously a little bit different than when I was licensed. So I was still working while being fully licensed too in the civilian world. And when I first entered, I think the pay was about the same, but after 4 years in, as you can kind of see, depending on your grade, so I came in as what was called an O2, so I had a full my license, so I came in as a first lieutenant with less than 2 years experience. So this is just my base pay was $3,673. So that doesn't include some of the other benefits we'll go over. But now after being in for 4 years, if you can kind of see and kind of look at, I did promote as well after 6 months or so because I had constructive credit. So we're going to look at the O3 section now. So I'm a captain. And with 4 years in, from 3,600, I'm now getting paid 5,671 is my base rate, and I'll explain more about the difference later. But that's a $2,000 increase over 4 years a month. So some things to consider and think about. Some of the pay advantages, these just kind of automatic bump ups, are really beneficial, especially when looking at kind of social work careers. So again, something to consider. So if we look at that initial monthly base rate when I first joined, or when somebody first joins, is 3,600. Again, constructive credit, prior military experience, all those different things kind of add up. And then you also get BAH. So BAH is your housing allowance. So again, 3,600 that initial, but depending on where you're living or where you're located, some examples. For San Antonio, my BAH was about, if I remember 2 or 3 years ago, was about $1,600, so $1,600 extra a month that I didn't have to worry about. And when you're on a stateside location, if you decide to have a roommate, or if you decide to buy your own house, that goes, anything extra of that goes straight into your pocket too. So, if I decide to just rent a room for $700 a month, I still get the whole 1,600, and 700 goes to my rent, but the rest of it I get to just accumulate as extra monthly pay. So that's something stateside. It's a little different when you're overseas. Overseas, the BAH just goes straight to being paid, so you can't take any extra. So you would use all that. And overseas right now, I think my housing allowance is an 03 with one dependent, so I am married, is about 1,800, I think, if I remember correctly. So it all depends on the location and the cost of living at that location. And then BAS, so BAS is you get like a certain stipend for food and things like that. That's a couple $100 usually, depending on how many dependents you have. And all of these pay rates, BAS, housing allowance can be accessed online via kind of Googling, hey, what's the BAH for this location, or what's the BAS if I have 2 kids, if I have 5 kids. I know some people with 7 kids. So kind of wherever you're at, those things you can look it up and see and understand how that changes. But for me and my spouse, BAS is usually around $200, $300. And then in addition to that too, there are bonuses. So as we talked about before, what makes you more marketable sometimes within the military is having your board certification. Well, that's an extra $500 a month for me now that I'm board certified. I've been board certified for about, I think, 2 or 3 years now. So just automatically that extra $500 a month. And then if you know another language, not necessarily Spanish, but if you know Chinese or Japanese or some other languages that are out there, you can get certain bonuses for that. And then for social workers as well, there are 2, 3, and 4-year contract bonuses. And they're what's called medical special pay, so they're incentives to keep us in, ultimately. The psychologists get paid a little bit differently, but ultimately our bonuses range from, I think it's $5,000 this last go around for 2 years, $7,000 if you agree to 3 more years, and then it can get up to $10,000 extra a year if you sign up for 4 years. Usually, too, that's something you can think about if you are talking to a recruiter, is saying, hey, are there any bonuses right now that are available for social workers depending on how many years I sign up? I got an initial medical specialist pay bonus. It's not always the case, but it's something you can definitely ask about. So do have that in the back of your head if you do decide to talk to a recruiter. And then obviously, one of the perks they kind of talk a lot about, or people know a lot about, is medical care. So there is a difference, though, active duty versus dependent coverage, but it's minuscule. Active duty, though, if anything happens to me, God forbid, knock on wood, I am covered. So, from a small surgery to a large surgery to things like LASIK or PRK, if I qualify or if I meet those things, those are things that can be taken care of for me, which is really nice peace of mind. So, it doesn't matter that I'm here in Japan. I still have medical care that I can receive on base and off base too, if I need it, if it's indicated, or if we don't have the resources within our own hospital. And then dependent, there are some kind of pros and cons. Some people are frustrated, like my spouse in particular needs glasses. Her optometry visits are available, what's called space A. So as appointments are available, she can see an optometrist here on base. But then the prescription for getting the actual glasses, that's something that's not covered. So there's a few little nuances like that. I think that, and maybe braces is another one. But otherwise, if there's a surgery, if there's, again, hopefully not, but if there's kind of a bigger medical need, they'll get her to the places that she needs to go to, as well as myself too. And if there's not the right capabilities here on island, they will actually fly us to a different location if that's something that's needed. We are good, working within the hospital. We are very conscientious of the taxpayer dollars, right, that are supporting us, and very much so look at those things. And so it is medically necessary. But there is a peace of mind to know, like, if something really happens, I'm going to be taken care of, and that is a wonderful kind of benefit that's there. And then I talked a little bit about kind of dependent medical care, but there's also educational benefits. So when I was an 01, or if you're an 01 or an 02, there's an automatic, just like $1,000 grant that your spouse can use. And then there's ample amounts of certifications from pharmacy tech to others that are free of charge sometimes at certain bases and locations that our spouses can utilize. There also is what's called spousal preference for GS or government jobs, so federal jobs. So my spouse wasn't on orders when I went to Texas, so she wasn't able to she was able to look at GS jobs on usajobs.gov, but she didn't have a higher preference level. So when we moved out to Japan and we were married at that time and she's on orders, she was able to hit spousal preference and now has a federal job over at the Navy hospital. So there are some really great benefits for our spouses in getting them a foot in the door. And in part, it's because she's taken a lot of hits on her career from mine. And so it's kind of acknowledging and understanding, hey, our spouses are moving with us every 2 to 4 years as well, and their careers or jobs don't always fit that. And so if they can get in the GS system, so the government system, and follow along with us, then it makes it a lot easier. But so that's a wonderful benefit that we learned about later on for our spouses. And then medical care, not just for our spouses, obviously too, for any kids that you might have as well. So that's, again, those other kind of added parts. And then let's look at too, so, again, those are kind of the multitude of different benefits that are out there, but there's also benefits or opportunities after service. So, if I only decided that I wanted to do my 3 years and then separate, well, now I have veteran preference when it comes to federal or GS jobs for myself. And there are an ample amount of VA jobs or otherwise out there for social workers, which is really great. I actually, prior to getting in, was trying to work at a VA, and it is really difficult if you don't have that veteran background. Not impossible by any means, but it is really difficult. And so those are things to think about. The doors open much more after your initial service. So, you can do 3 years, you can do 4 years, you can do 20, right, and retire. But ultimately, that veteran preference does help in getting some of those federal jobs after you decide to separate, or if, you retire, or other things like that. And then there are other job opportunities. So it makes you more marketable for some of the contracted positions. It makes you more marketable for what's called military family life counselors. So just, again, it's that aspect of, with your initial service as a social worker, within the military, you get those other possible benefits on, hey, getting your foot in the door a little bit easier to some of these other jobs. Because the military environment is very unique with all the acronyms and everything like that. They do look at, hey, it's much better treatment that our service members will get if somebody has that experience. And then the kind of last two things are looking at recruiter information. So if you are, after looking at, some of the benefits, and we talked a little bit too about some of the cons, being a social worker and being active duty. But if you are ultimately interested either in finding out more information specifically from a recruiter, I did provide here the Air Force Medical Officer Recruiter. So it's Tech Sergeant Shields, or Sergeant Shields, with his email and his cell phone number too. Do bear in mind he is stationed in Hawaii, so there is a time difference if you are calling his cell phone. And then our Reserve Medical Officer Recruiter, Master Sergeant, I don't know how to say his last name exactly, but I also have his email there listed for you. So those are two really good resources if you're interested in Air Force social work in particular. And then there's a multitude of Facebook groups as well. The active duty social work group and the military mental health group will have more of the Navy and the Army officers out there who are social workers. So if you're interested in one of the other branches, going on the active duty social work page on Facebook or the military mental health page can get you linked up. Or again, feel free to email me. I'll provide my email address in the next slide, I think. And you can email me as well, and I can try and find you and connect you with an active duty social worker. I know some here in the Navy. I don't know any Army offhand, but I can definitely find that for you guys if you are interested. Just let us know. And then to the United States Air Force social work page is a really active, wonderful page, has a ton of different people from all over the world, including people who are just interested in applying in the first place. So if you are interested in Air Force social work in particular, it's a really good page to add. And you can mention, there was a recent post on there that talked about, who's applying to this next board, or who's applying to be a social worker this year. And us as active duty members are on there to give you guys pointers or tips of things to look out for, or things to be aware of, or things to ask in the first place. So don't hesitate to reach out to us on social media as well. But yeah, I hope I answered or that this addressed a lot of the questions or thoughts you might have about just military social work in particular. But if you have anything else, again, don't hesitate to email me.
All right.
And I think we'll probably segue. Oh, there you go.
Yeah,
to some
perfect. Yeah.
some questions that we.
Sounds good. All right, let's start that off. And thank you so much for this comprehensive overview of these military social work opportunities. Yeah, happy to uh, relay a few prepared questions here. And again, if we don't address any specific questions you have, please feel free to reach out to Michelle at the Gmail address that she listed. But as a first question, um, will a person be deployed if they decide to pursue social work opportunities in the military?
So it does depend on the branch, and that is one thing. We do go on what's called a deployment band. So there's a certain amount of months where you are up for a potential deployment, but it really is, for the Air Force, at least I can speak to in particular, it really is if you volunteer, if that's something you really want to do. And I used to think, I wasn't really serving in the military till I deployed. It's very different now, kind of thought process. We do a lot, and we're on 24/7, and we do exercises, and we do a multitude of other, and exercises are like kind of mini, what's it called, practice deployments ultimately, and tons of training related to deployment and being a valuable asset if we get deployed. But it isn't necessarily, in the 4 years, I've never been tasked to deploy. I've seen taskers come down that says, hey, we're looking for volunteers, and there's usually I think there's about 200 or so active duty social workers within the United States Air Force, so not a ton when you really think about it, compared to the 300,000 or so just active duty Air Force members in general. But you don't have a ton of those mandates coming down for deployment. So an option if you want it, but not necessarily something that will have to happen within your career.
Great. On a similar vein, how does vacation or off time work as a military social worker?
Oh, I got you. So I think the average is about 30 days that we get of leave. So that's just set leave. That doesn't include federal holidays. And the wonderful part about serving overseas is you get your federal holidays, and sometimes you get what's called a family day or a training day. So I still have 30 days of leave separate from the federal holidays and or family days. And if the kind of federal holidays, I think there's at least probably 6 or 10, and then sometimes some of those 6 or 10 days we actually get a bonus day or two, and then separate from that we get 30 days of leave. And I think I briefly kind of talked about one of the downsides is sometimes if you're traveling internationally, you might have to put in additional paperwork, and they ask for that stuff 30 days out, but it doesn't necessarily take more than 2 weeks or so to get approved. But those are things that living, I can't just decide, hey, this weekend I really want to go to Thailand. I have to pre-plan that out a little bit. So anywhere between 30 days plus a little extra possibly. And there's also things like emergency leave and convalescent leave and maternity leave. And maternity leave actually got extended from 6 weeks to 12 weeks. So if you do get pregnant while you're an active duty member and have a child, you get 3 months off ultimately of paid leave. So there's an assortment amount of other types of leave too. But ultimately 30 days, but some other kind of additional leaves that can apply to you as well.
Great. Getting more into the specific experience of military social workers, how do you keep or maintain work-life balance?
Oh yeah, so that's a hard one. I think that was a big learning curve for me personally when I first got in, is being able to maintain that, because there's always things that can be done, and sometimes you're doing your job, but you're also doing some what's called additional duties. So it is a little bit harder, but as you understand what's an appropriate boundary for you, how to push back and say no to certain things, it becomes a little bit easier. So for me now, at least, getting that work-life balance, is about really having a good relationship with my supervisor, having them understand, where I'm at certain times and what I'm doing, and prioritizing, hey, the work's still going to be there. Sometimes I'm just going to decide to leave at, 4:30, even though I've still got a little extra work, and maybe I'll come in earlier, or maybe I'll work through lunch one day. But it just depends. And I got in a really bad habit of eating lunch at my desk, and have decided that that's not something I want to do as much anymore. And so, again, it's really personal. But ultimately now, I choose to go out with a few coworkers at lunch at least once a week, and have that kind of break away from the office and kind of refresh myself. And so there's a lot of those opportunities. And And for us too, as active duty members, we are entitled to 2 to 3 hours of what's called PT, just physical training on our own. And so that's one thing that, hey, for a while I was not good at taking my PT time, and some people are better at than others. And so now it's, a few times a week or 1 or 2 times a week, I might decide, hey, I'm going to plan my appointments with my patients, and I'm going to make sure I get, out early, or I take a lunch PT or something like that. So there's an assortment of ways, but it is really a kind of a live and learn the hard way sometimes, or get that mentorship and understand what's okay, what's not okay, and how to really find that balance for yourself.
Great. And on a similar vein, if a military social worker does, experience burnout or have their own mental health issues that they're dealing with, where do they go for help?
Yeah, so we have, those 4 elements that we talked about a little bit, BHOP, mental health, ADAPT, and family advocacy, but we also have kind of earlier based interventions. So the military family life counselors are completely confidential, except if there's a duty to warn, so if there's any safety concerns. But if there's no safety concerns, and hey, I'm getting burnt out because of all the patients I have to see, or I'm not able to maintain that work-life balance, or I'm, dealing with issues with my spouse or issues with my kids, I can see what's called a military family life counselor. And the great part about these positions is they're contractors, so we don't have to worry about, this isn't somebody in my chain of command, or this isn't going to get back to somebody in my chain of command. It's somebody, it's a contracted position. But they're also licensed clinical social workers and professional counselors who can see me for 12 sessions on any one topic. So, again, struggling with divorce or struggling with marital issues, I can be seen 12 times with that MFLAC free of charge. And they often have appointments too early in the morning or in the evening to work around my schedule as well. So that's one option. And then the chaplain corps. So whether you're religious or not, so I'm not incredibly religious myself, but that's an option I've used myself actually too, to get that added just feedback and support. Like, hey, I'm struggling with, for me, the move here to Okinawa was quite stressful, and I didn't have a strong social support here yet. And my spouse came later on, I came on my own. So being able to have a chaplain who, that one is 100% confidential. So even if I had safety concerns, they wouldn't warn anybody else. But ultimately, they're there for us throughout the day too. I think they have, again, evening, night hours and things like that. So the MFLACs, the chaplain corps. But if I do need, more medical treatment, oftentimes stateside, you can be seen off base sometimes. If it's appropriate, and if it's something that you talk to about, with your PCM, your primary care doctor otherwise, and there are some options there, or being seen at a different base, or being seen by a different branch. So if you do need that mental health care or treatment through a mental health clinic or one of the other programs, those are other options. There are other options for you too, to make sure there's no kind of conflicts of, this is somebody I worked with or I'm working with. But yeah.
All right, and we'll end with a question that I always enjoy asking, and that's, what is a day in the life of a social worker in the military? What does that look like for you?
Yeah. So when I first joined, I was within the ADAPT program. And so that, again, is the Alcohol and Drug Abuse Prevention Treatment Program. So so there was more of an actual kind of supervisory role. We had certified counselors, or what's called mental health technicians, who would see patients. And then I would also carry a certain patient load myself. So I would see a lot more of the kind of higher risk patients sometimes. So that would be either supervising or doing what's called like kind of an eyes on for 2 or 3 patients that my technician would see, and then maybe seeing 2 or 3 patients myself as well in the day. And then good old documentation, if I'm taking a lunch and things like that. So that would kind of be a day for an entry-level social worker within the military. And then here in Okinawa, I am a staff social worker within the mental health clinic. And so on average, I see anywhere between 5 plus or minus patients if somebody no-shows or there's a cancellation, and then plus or minus sometimes, if somebody walks in acutely and the triage provider is really busy, but I have a slot that's available. So anywhere usually around 5 patients on average a day is what my schedule kind of looks like. And then within that 8-hour duty day, I have time to do some documentation. I can get in a little earlier, or I can leave for PT a day or take lunch. Usually ends up working out as well too.
All right. Well, thank you so much for answering these questions. And again, if anybody joining us has questions that we did not cover, please do feel comfortable emailing Michelle at that Gmail address that she included on this slide. With that, yeah, thank you so much, U.S. Air Force Captain Michelle Sierra Quandam, for this really valuable presentation. Thank you all for joining us. Want to make sure on everybody's radar, you're aware that next week we start Career Month. So that's a month of programming that begins for us November 4th. And you can visit our events page at careers.uchicagoalumni.org for more information. But thank you all, and have a great rest of your day.